Hi everybody, my name is Pat O'Connor and I will be your instructor for HSTR 102, Western Civilization 2. Joining me this semester will be two teaching assistants, Ryan McCarty and Lorene McFarland. You're going to hear from us every week. We're going to be facilitating your small group discussions. We're going to be giving you feedback on your assignments. We'll be sending regular emails and we're looking forward to working with all of you. I just want to use this video to run through a couple of basic points about this course and get you on board for what we're going to do. As you all know, I've circulated a copy of the syllabus, and you can also find a copy on Moodle. If you find it helpful, I'd suggest having a copy of that handy while you're watching this video. As you can see, the syllabus is quite thorough. I'm not going to bore you by running through every single point on there, but I do want to direct you to one section in particular. It's called How to Succeed in this Course. I believe it's on page 2. I think this class is going to be fairly straightforward. I've designed it to be as straightforward as possible. And I think that's especially true if you follow the suggestions that I've laid out in that section of the syllabus. As long as you're watching every lecture and taking notes, as long as you're participating frequently in discussions and drawing from the readings in your participation, as long as you're getting things done on time, and as long as you're reading everything that's assigned, you're going to be in good shape. When Ryan, Lorene, or I reach out to you or reach out to the whole class, just make sure you read the email, make sure you read the notification. And then also, if you ever have questions about anything, if you're ever not sure about anything, if you ever feel like you're not understanding something, just reach out. I think that kind of communication between students and instructors is really, really important for student success. So please don't ever feel like you're causing any kind of problem if you do have a question, that is. Every week, every Monday, I'm going to post a lecture. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to post a short quiz. You're going to succeed on these quizzes if you watch the lecture, you've taken notes, and you've done the reading. They're going to be very straightforward, very simple. Same goes for the exams. We're going to have 3 exams. Those are going to come entirely from the lecture and the readings. Exams are not cumulative, so each one covers 1/3 of the class, and they cover material only that we've gone over since the last exam. So the last exam of the course will cover everything from exam number 2 to the end. Pretty straightforward. Last but not least, I've heard from many of you about this, so I know people are getting this done, but just make sure you get a copy of the book, Marvin Perry's Sources of the Western Tradition, Volume 2, From the Renaissance to the Present, 10th edition. If you get an earlier edition, I can't promise that all of the sources I've assigned are going to be in there. So just make your life easier and get that 10th edition. Okay. Let's turn to some of the bigger themes, some of the bigger content that we're going to be learning about this semester, the more interesting and exciting material. So this course is going to cover the history of Europe from the 18th century, that's the 1700s, just before the French Revolution, up to the present. This is more than 3 centuries of time. This is spread across a continent with hundreds of ethnicities, dozens of different languages, a continent, I should also say, that did not keep to itself over the last few hundred years. It's a continent that has dramatically influenced the rest of the world. So that's a ton of material. There's a lot of stuff, and we need to make some choices because we only have 15 weeks. So our focus geographically is going to be primarily on Western Europe, and that's sort of broadly conceived Western Europe, France, Germany, Britain, the Western Mediterranean. And we're going to take some trips to Eastern Europe as well, and we're going to think about developments in places like Poland and Ukraine and Russia. We're going to move chronologically for the most part, but in each section of the course, we're also going to return to a few big themes. So the course has a thematic organization in addition to a chronological one. And I'm going to talk about some of those themes in just a second here. We've got a ton of ground to cover just to give you a sense of how much ground we have to cover, consider a map of Europe in 1700. And don't worry, I'm going to come back to this slide, so don't feel like you have to rewind. Let's just take a look at this map. So as you can see, and if you want to pull up a map of Europe today, just for for the comparison, I suggest doing that. But as you can see, Europe in 1700 is a continent dominated not by nation states, as we might expect, but by empires, right? That's supreme governing authorities that exert control over the political and economic and cultural lives of subjects who aren't necessarily part of the political society, right? They don't have a direct influence on who's governing them. So, for example, you see here in Eastern Europe, Eastern Europe is a region today that's composed of many, many independent nation states, but at this point, it's dominated by just a few major empires. We have the Habsburg monarchy, which stretches from the eastern boundaries of contemporary Germany all the way down to contemporary Romania. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth stretches over not only modern-day Poland and Lithuania, but also Latvia and Belarus and down even into modern Ukraine. And then in the southeast here, we have the Ottoman Empire, right? And the Ottoman Empire is stretching across a region that we know of as the Balkans, right? Home of contemporary nations such as Albania and Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, but then also down into modern day Greece, all the way down here, east into Turkey. And what about if we look at the heart of Europe, right? Where we would expect to find the nation of Germany, right? Instead, what we see is a jumble of principalities. We see many smaller kingdoms. In fact, it's even more jumbled than this map would suggest, because this entire area in white here in the middle, according to this map maker, this is just minor German states. It's too complex, they're too small for the map maker to really break it up any further. Same goes for the Italian peninsula, right? It looks somewhat similar to what we see in Germany. It's a collection of kingdoms. It's from the Papal States to the Kingdom of Naples, but there's no such thing as a united Italy. In both Italy and Germany, in fact, the reality of a united single nation, similar to what we would expect today in the 21st century, doesn't even emerge for almost 2 centuries after this map is supposedly covering, in the 1870s. Far Western Europe, as you can see, looks a little bit more familiar. We see France, the Spanish monarchy, and Portugal, and we see England, Scotland. We also see Ireland, which is under the Dominion of England. As many of you probably know, at least most of that island today is an independent nation as well. Okay. So just as the borders of Europe have changed many, many times, in profound ways since 1700, so too have the political structures that govern that territory, right? Today, most of these countries have democratically elected governments, but in 1700, there were very different political systems in place. Right? For example, Britain in 1700, or England rather, in 1700, was a constitutional monarchy. It's a parliamentary system in which legislative power and decision-making is in the hands of elected representatives, but they're not elected by the masses, right? Instead, they're representing a very small class of landowning men, right? An elite strata of the society who control property and share their power with the monarch. Although Parliament, even in 1700, really did control most of that power. And that parliamentary model is one example of what government was like in Europe in 1700. But much more common was an absolutist model. And throughout Europe, from France to Russia, absolutist governments were in charge. And in that model, the state, right, the government, is not distinguishable from the person of the monarch. right? So as the French King Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King, put it, or is said to have put it, I am the state, right? The monarch is the government. Much of what we're going to discuss in this course has to do with questions of government, right? How Europeans came to challenge prevailing models like absolutism, but also how they constructed alternatives, right? It's one thing to demolish a form of government, but then what comes in its place, right? We're going to begin with the French Revolution, which was a moment of great significance not only in France, but across the European world, as it announced the great popular challenge to absolutist monarchs. And it initiates really a conversation, it's one way to put it, a conversation that is still ongoing. It's often been a very violent conversation about what form of government should take the place of the absolutist monarchies that are reigning in 1700. And Europeans' answers to that question have taken many, many ideological forms. When we talk about ideology in this class, what we're talking about is like a system of ideas and beliefs and theories that explain or defend or challenge the prevailing order of a society, or imagine a different order of society. Some of those ideologies that we're going to discuss: conservatism, liberalism, socialism, communism, fascism, right? All of the great isms of the world that we live in now emerge in the period that we're talking about in this course. And they emerge amid this centuries-long process by which Europeans try to figure out how to govern themselves and also how to govern others. But we're not only going to discuss governments and borders. We're also going to discuss how European societies have changed over time. And along those lines, one of our biggest issues is going to be the issue of class, right? We're going to explore, for example, the waning power of one class, the aristocracy, right? These folks, this is the elites who surrounded monarchs in the absolutist systems. And we're going to explain and explore the rising power of other classes, particularly amid the Industrial Revolution. Right? And these new classes are probably going to be a lot more familiar to you than the aristocracy. We're going to think about the middle class. We're going to think about the working class. And we're going to explore the transformations that not only affected how these people lived, but also how they thought about themselves, how they knew which class they belonged to, and how they understood, although in many cases did not accept, their position in the wider society. Okay. So along those lines, we're going to be exploring cultural and intellectual trends throughout the period, and we're gonna particularly focus on artists and authors and intellectuals and politicians and others who have tried to make sense of this relationship between the individual and the society. And that's the question that's really at the heart of class identity. How do I relate to the broader society? And it's also the issue that's at the heart of all of those ideological explanations of government that I mentioned just a minute ago, right? What is the best way for me to relate to the rest of the society? And then finally, we're going to discuss the most important question that historians ever discuss, which is change over time. What changes and why, right? That is history at its most basic level. That's what historians do. But in addition to change, we're going to think about continuity as well, right? And this is really important because we aren't necessarily studying some triumphal narrative where the future is always better than what came before and always leaves what came before in the past forgotten. That's not really how history ever works, and it's certainly not how it works in the period and in the place that we're talking about in this class. We're not marching on a straight line that everybody agrees with from the Enlightenment to the European Union. Rather, we're thinking about how the past can hang around, how it gives shape to the present and the future, how it determines the range of possible outcomes, how it affects people's worldview, things like this. So that's what we're going to be learning about this semester. For a little bit more information about specific topics that we're going to talk about, certainly take a look through the syllabus, which lays out all of the big issues on the table. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. But I'm looking forward to getting started. Thank you.